Good morning, everyone. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting, and I'm also the director for the Center of Marketing Solutions at the University of South Carolina. I am so delighted to have Raul Ruiz here today because this is a topic I've been waiting to talk to somebody about for a very, very long time. Um, Working in private equity is a very different kind of experience than working for a publicly held company or a privately held company. I've done it now for all three types.
Mm,
So I've had my own experiences, but Raul, welcome to the show.
thank you.
So why don't we start off with a simple question first? Give us a little bit of background about who you are. Let's start with that first.
I love it. By the way, Yogesh, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to everyone that's tuned in. So thank you again, Yogesh. Yeah, just a little bit about me. I've worked in CPG for 15 plus years. I've worked across a number of different sectors,
Mhm.
from office products to regulated categories like office. Like alcohol beverage, worked in nicotine categories, and then most recently in the housewares and small kitchen appliance space. So I just recently ended my tenure at Instant Brands, where, as the theme of this conversation is about private equity
Yeah,
firms. So it's a private equity backed firm where I was the senior vice president of brand marketing, where I was responsible for the business unit P&L, brand marketing, innovation, new product development. So a lot of good things, from that perspective.
that's a pretty broad swath of things you're working on in the context of marketing, right? So let's kind of get a little bit into it. So first, kind of give me a sense about, since you worked in other, in other environments as well, like
Right.
what are the similarities and differences between working in private equity from a marketing perspective relative to, say, publicly held companies, for example?
Yeah, great question, Yogesh. I get asked that a lot, especially as in today's world, there's a lot of buzz around working for private equity firms. So
Mhm.
let's kind of drill it down to something that's very, very simple so that we can all kind of understand. So,
Mhm.
from a public company perspective, what I'm gonna offer up is that it offers stability. So if you think of working in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies,
Mhm.
from an employment perspective, there's generally some job security. There's
Mhm.
predictable work environments. From an employee benefit perspective, there's a lot of comprehensive benefits. There's a lot of great programs. So stability is probably the first key in a public company, which most of us are probably familiar with. From a career development perspective, all of us are very focused on wanting to advance to the next level and things like that. So from a career perspective, there's generally very structured career pathways. There's training programs. There's clear professional growth trajectories.
Mhm.
So it's important that I mention that when we talk about private equity, but there's that clear pathway that's established. And then
Mhm.
from a resource and transparency perspective, there's generally robust, transparent infrastructure involved. Not that there aren't in other companies, but there's generally some very robust processes out there. There's also financial resources, and there's a lot of there's more top-down transparency because in public organizations, you have to share with shareholders what the earnings are, and a lot of that financial information is also shared internally with the organization. So
Mhm.
it's a brief summary on public traded companies.
Mhm.
If we look at the private equity side, what's probably the biggest difference, that in my own experience, is that it's a very, very dynamic environment. So when we talk about dynamic environment, it's a very fast-paced environment. It's very flexible. It's a little fluid. Not a lot of people like fluidity, and it's a very entrepreneurial atmosphere. And I know in public companies, we talk about, roll up your sleeves, it's entrepreneurial. In private equity, it truly is very entrepreneurial. You've got greater autonomy. It can be a very exciting time. And it may not be for everyone because there's a lot of ambiguity. So that's the dynamic side of it. From a
Mhm.
career perspective, what's a little different from, in private equity is that there is the potential for rapid advancement. And so your career, you can, 1 year you could be the director of brand marketing, and next year you're responsible for all three business units, which was the experience of my career over the 3-year trajectory. But team members that worked in the environment were able to see some rapid advancements. With risk, there's also financial rewards based on performance. Obviously, the organization needs to meet certain objectives, and so there's some rewards that are generally could be a little bit more lucrative than what you may find in a corporate environment. And then the other biggest difference is strategic influence and impact in the organization. So as I mentioned, it's very entrepreneurial, it's autonomous. Here, you're very, very closely tied in with the C-suite. You're often in very senior level conversations where teams feel very empowered or have the opportunity to truly help shape what that financial or what the strategy could be for the organization and make a direct financial impact. So those are really, the differences between public and private. And what I would just, summarize, it's dynamic. You've got rapid advancement, high risk, high reward. And then you really, really do have the opportunity to be strategically involved in the influence and the strategy of the organization.
That's an amazing, summary of, similarities and difference right there. Let me ask you something, for people who are, let's say on the publicly, held company side,
Right.
There has been a trend for quite some time. This is nothing new that I'm saying here.
Right.
When companies, get acquired by private equity, right, or VCs,
Right.
and then they suddenly implement this kind of mindset into those kinds of companies. Have you experienced that yourself, or have you seen how that has actually impacted? I'm just curious to hear if you've got anything to say on
Absolutely. So I think, in my experience, Yogesh, I had transitioned from a public company. I was working at, a publicly traded company. I transitioned into Instant Brands at the time, which the company, by the way, also evolved over time. We can talk a little bit more about how it's changed. And so when I joined the team, it was in 2020. It was in the middle of COVID. It was very disruptive. The teams were used to a different, there's a different management team involved. I came in as part of a new management structure. And so there was a lot of change going on. So to answer your question, Yogesh, that was the experience here when private equity. So it really transitioned from one private equity organization to another. And then, here before I left, successfully exited my tenure here, we also traded hands with another private equity firm. So I think it's very, common in today's business environment, and I truly believe we'll probably see more and more of it.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So one question that has always been on my mind, and I remember facing this, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I even surviving in this environment? Is literally the thoughts that were running through my head at the time.
I think about that often, by the way. So survival is important. So yeah, you're not alone obviously in that mindset.
Exactly. But there's this sense of I have to deliver something now. I can't be doing something that's going to be 6 months from now, right? Is that a common thing, or is that your experience as well? And how do you reconcile that? You're a brand marketer at the end of the day. You know the value of brand marketing. So, and that takes time. So how do you make that work in the context of, private equity?
Yeah. Great question. I'm going to go back a little back in time when I started, at Instant. It was my first foray in private equity. And I remember sitting in front, had a meeting with my CEO and who I reported directly into. And he said, Raul, you're in charge of the serveware and tabletop business unit. Oh, and by the way, you got to develop a strategy in 30 days. And I want to see a rough cut. I want to have weekly meetings with you, see rough cuts, and understand what your strategy is, have a general idea of the situation assessment, and then start thinking about your innovation roadmap. So, you can just imagine, where coming from a publicly traded company where there's annual business planning, there's processes, there's a cycle, et cetera. Here, I didn't go through a cycle. Obviously teams that were working with me had some strategic documents involved, and there's already some work happening there. But there was a whole shaping of a new approach that needed to be developed and refined in a matter of weeks, because we also had to deliver what that approach would be to the private equity firm who owned us. And so while I had responsibilities to deliver not only to my CEO, I had to work with the team and extended teams to develop, as I mentioned, a brand strategy, understand what's going on with the business, what's the competition doing, what's the current innovation roadmap, is there one, and how does it need to be shaped, and package that all together in a cohesive way, working with cross-functional teams so that we're all aligned and we're shaping and serving that up to the organization. And then ultimately getting head nods, making some refinements, and then sharing that with the private equity group that may like it, they may not like it. Luckily here in this case, we were able to shape it together, but in many instances it may not be, and you have to go back to the drawing board. And again, I mentioned it's fluid, it's flexible. You just have to be nimble and be dynamic in working in that environment.
So I guess one of the challenges in what you're describing, I see two challenges in what you're describing, and correct me if I'm wrong. Number one is speed. You cannot be caught up and mired in process. You have to move fast, right? With that comes a challenge of enrollment within the organization. People have to, they won't have the time to, for lack of a better word, reflect a lot. They have to kind of instinctively say, yes, we're on board or not, I imagine, right? And the second challenge is also around investment, right? Because with private equity, at least in my experience, they're all about the bottom line. So they aren't going to be far more scrutinizing, let's say, what kind of investments you want to make. Am I on the right path on those kinds of challenges, or what's your take?
So fast. So that's important. So we've already checked the box on that perspective. From performance metrics, Yogesh, I'm gonna say it's not really too different from public companies with private companies from a financial perspective. There is more working and understanding the top and bottom line numbers, but the same thing goes in publicly traded.
Sure.
So that's not really different. So I think what helps in the transition from public to private from a financial perspective is you truly need to understand the financial metrics and truly live and lead by them, because in the private equity space, it is very financial metric driven. And so if you already come from an environment where financial metrics are key, and that's how you're able to successfully meet the annual objectives, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually, wherever they are, you'll be able to transition very seamlessly in the private equity world. But to your point, it is very financial metric driven. You need to understand your top line from a revenue perspective. Gross margins are very, very critical. And you have to understand how that serves into EBITDA. So, and so when you look through the line of the P&L, it's important to understand the variables that you're able to directly impact, and then some other variables that you may not be able to impact, but you can influence. You need to understand that in this world. And I think the other part too is understanding your point of sale. So obviously we all don't work in a bubble. You need to understand what's going on externally, how your product's performing. So point of sale remains critical as you understand what the future or the balance of the year performance would be for your organization, and that goes hand in hand with inventory and then the operational cycle as well. So I think, Yogesh, what I would probably summarize is yes, private equity. You hear about the finance. They're all numbers guys. They're all in. So it's true, but it really is from managing the business, you really have to understand the financial metrics.
Mhm.
It's not any different from a public company. You're just more at the forefront of the numbers. And if
Mhm.
you're comfortable with the numbers, and if you're comfortable digesting them and understanding them, you'll be fine.
You know, I think there's something here for the audience to also reflect on, because people come in, especially those early in career in marketing, let's say, right? They're energetic and they're inspired by the concept of going into marketing.
Right.
But what you just said, hey, it's not just about knowing your marketing functional expertise. It's knowing the business as well, knowing how supply chain works and logistics works, how
Right.
does sales work, how does finance work. You
Right.
got to know all these things. There's a reason why we have to learn all these things in our early on in our careers, because it comes together. And in this particular case, it feels like you have to keep the financial metrics front and center, because that's what you're ultimately held accountable to, right?
That's a really great point, Yogesh. If I look back, not to go back into my educational, foundation,
Yeah.
but from from an undergraduate perspective, I studied finance. So
Mhm.
finance was my major at the university, and then obviously insights or advertising and anthropology is
Mhm.
what formulated the marketing side of my professional thinking.
Right.
Now, as a professional, I've never worked on the financial or for a financial team, as
Mhm.
I've worked into more in the sales and marketing role. But I
Mhm.
think, to your point, just having the financial freedom to understand balance sheets,
Mhm.
understand being comfortable with the accounting methodologies, with the numbers,
Mhm.
that has helped me throughout my marketing career, so that I can have fun with the creative side of marketing, the advertising, the squishy, creative side, but
Mhm.
really have a lens from a financial responsibility. And so I
Mhm.
believe that has truly helped me be successful in the way that I've been able to use the creative side of my mindset into having that financial perspective, to have the heads down and to really be able to drive what businesses and private equity teams are looking for, are the
Yeah.
numbers. And
Yeah.
so that's allowed me that ability. And so what I would probably share to to the audience and to yourself here
Yeah.
is, you don't want, it's the art and science of the marketing to then deliver the business performance that we ultimately, that's what we get paid for, right? And so we want to make sure that we're always delivering on numbers. And then the finance teams will always kind of be okay with signing the checks on more marketing investment,
Yeah.
from that perspective.
So let's talk about that. So because of the importance of the financial metrics,
Right.
designing a strategy that delivers against those financial metrics, right? One thing that I've experienced two scenarios in my career. One where the numbers were, let's say, reasonable targets. They were aggressive, don't get me wrong, but they were still reasonable in the context of the market. And then there
Right.
were instances I've seen where the numbers are completely unreasonable, and you're being asked to deliver against that, in the fiscal year or whatever the case may be, right? Um, how do you approach, as the head of the marketing function, how do you approach those scenarios? What is your way of navigating that? Because ultimately, you may have no say on the financial targets at the end of the day, right? So I'm just curious to hear how you've handled those situations.
Yep. So a great question, Yogesh. As I mentioned, at being part of a very dynamic organization, we actually do have the opportunity to have a voice in the financial metrics. And
Mhm.
so ultimately, they might get shaped, above us, and
Mhm.
working with in other conversations that the senior leadership team may not be a part of, but
Mhm.
essentially, I did have the opportunity to have some influence in the business
Okay.
metrics. And so from a brand marketing perspective, from a brand strategy, this is where we will work very closely with the marketing side of the business, with our CMO, with the rest of the sales organization and the rest of the different disciplines, to come, and obviously with the head of sales, to come together and understand, okay, what can the P&L deliver, and can we outline risk to the plan. And so I think while, the example that you gave where maybe it may feel that the numbers are presented and you got to drive these numbers.
Yeah.
I think we as leaders can put together a risk to the plan and ensure that we communicate that to the organization and then make some edits and modifications along the way, especially when it comes to as we near quarter end or mid-year end or balance of year. So I think it's always having the transparency and honest communication of where edits need to be made from a financial perspective. When I think about brand marketing and then working with the marketing teams on budgets, it's really understanding your working and non-working dollars. So you want to, in these environments, you want to make sure that your non-working dollars, so things to keep the lights on, or for lack of agency fees, or these services you got to pay for, ensure that these are the services that you need, because the working dollars such as media, paid social media, investments in promotional and trade marketing, you want to make sure that you've got enough of those dollars to truly deliver the love of the products that need to be supported.
So in that environment, I'm just curious, when you're leading that and you're, like you said, you're influencing the numbers, you're obviously building out the risk, and, you're being transparent about the risk.
Right.
Do you have space then to be able to experiment? Or do you feel like, everything that you're doing has to just first deliver on the numbers, and there's very little room left for creative and experimentation that you might have wanted to try to see if it could have actually given you additional upside, for example? I'm just curious as to how that plays out in this instance.
Yep. So test and learn is a part of the cultural mentality. So I'm lucky to have worked with a team that is open to test and learn. So I've learned that early on in my career. Basically carving out whether a portion of your budget or some of your budget for test and learn activities. I do believe in the private equity space because you have such limited resources. You almost have to embrace test and learn, opportunities. And that allows you to be nimble. That allows you to be in this fast-paced environment where every dollar matters. You almost have to test and learn to ensure, okay, if I'm going to spend $1 in this new social media platform, well, I may just want to try a few dollars here, see if it works, and then truly add in more dollars to deliver momentum. So in where we were, in the environment that we were in, we definitely leveraged test and learn across, whether it was media partners, the marketing team worked very closely with influencers. From a research perspective, we embraced, instead of qualitative research done at a central testing location, we looked at qualitative insights online, where we had a moderator that was running these programming online with consumers that were in these chat rooms. A very different way to use, efficient, to be more efficient with dollars versus, going to all these central testing locations, for example, in that experiment. But to your point, we have to embrace test and learn, because we're not going to have the deep dollars that we had in many of the public companies that we might be used to.
You've actually raised something, and I'm going to segue a little bit to come back into this. But like when I talk to people in market research, for example, especially on the vendor side, like they're all about hey, we have to be methodologically correct. We have to be rigorous in our approach. We have to be dare I say puristic. In terms of how you get things done. But the environment you're describing, there's no time for that, or there's no space for that, it seems like. And it's not because you don't want it. Of course you do, because you obviously don't want to have bad data entering into the system. But it feels like you're allowing your intuition, your knowledge, your experience to be validated by the external information,
right?
So that you can move forward. Am I kind of like thinking about that the right way or not?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of intuition that you generally do use, but at the same time, we as marketers, we want to validate with the consumer lens, and
Yeah.
obviously, in traditional methods, we want to be behind the glass, the glass panel, and hearing what consumers want, what they don't want. And
Mhm.
when you don't have the dollars, when you truly are limited in those resources,
Mhm.
there are other tools out there like these online chat tools where you can still have the qualitative numerical consumers
Mhm.
to validate. It just might feel a little squishy, a little fluid because
Mhm.
you're not seeing these consumers. They're more, actively, in these chat rooms. But
Yeah.
it is a structured environment where you can get clear learnings
Mhm.
from actual consumers that you've selected the demographics for. So
Yeah.
there's ways to be very creative in understanding what the consumer sentiment is. So it is a little bit of intuition, but you can use insights from consumers, whether it's like the
Mhm.
online version that I mentioned with we actually worked with our insights partner
Mhm.
in looking at this tool, but there's others out there as well that you can be a little bit more nimble with some online tools. And it may feel like I hate to use the word cheating, but it might feel like you're not talking to the consumer, but you really are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. And I think that's part and parcel of the transformation that's happening, right? Not just in the broader marketing community, but also within the different segments of marketing as well, whether it's the creative side or the insight side or the operation side, whatever it is, you know, everything right now feels disrupted in the marketing space right now, right? For those reasons, in my mind
Oh,
at least.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about AI, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely significant changes there, and it's going to change the way that we work today and tomorrow,
Absolutely.
probably. So,
We'll come to that, but before we get to the AI conversation, I want to ask you about transformation first, because you've led significant transformation,
yep.
at the end of the day. So, talk to us about your experiences from a marketing perspective during those significant periods of change that you had. Whether it's mergers and acquisitions, whether it's
Right.
disruption because of technology. Pick a couple of those examples and let's just walk through them.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So, I mentioned my time when I first started at the organization, we created new business units. So new teams, we're
Mhm.
refining and shaping processes, we're kicking off meetings. So there was just a lot of disruption and change happening there. So I think, Yogesh, what I would probably offer up is in times of very disruptive periods, what was successful for us is ensuring that we're communicating with our teams. So
Mhm.
we were very proactive, or our C-suite was very proactive with town halls.
Mhm.
So hearing from senior leadership on what the vision, what the changes are, that created transparency or creates transparency within the organization to understand, okay, this is how information is cascading down from very C-suite, from the C-suite team down through the organization. So town halls were really very, very important. Weekly team meetings. I along with my team would have team meetings to understand, okay, what did the team hear? Are there concerns that they weren't able to vocalize in a large forum? Can we tackle them together as a team and
Mhm.
and dive deeper into them? So that was a forum that was also established. And I think during disruption, in whether you're in disruption or not disruption, having consistent one-on-one communication with your direct reports is very important. So line managers with their direct team members, having those individual one-on-one conversations go a long way, because let's be honest, Yogesh, not everyone's an extrovert. Not people are a little bit more comfortable or maybe we're not comfortable. We're more comfortable in one-on-one settings. So it's
Mhm.
understanding how teams work a little differently, or individual members are motivated with those conversations. So during times of disruption, what I'd probably say, it's very important to be transparent with information.
Mhm.
Whether you're changing a business unit or whether new teams are coming in, you need to communicate to individuals and be transparent. And that happened not only at the very beginning when I started. I mentioned that we were purchased by a new private equity firm. So in the middle of that disruption, if you can just imagine, we're driving our day-to-day business. We've got responsibilities day to day, and all of a sudden, we have a new firm that's taking over, which can sound a little scary for teams. We talked a little bit about stability, those types of very important, items that teams are very want to better understand. So you've got to really be transparent about these types of communication of what's going on. So yeah, being clear and honest with the teams it goes a long way.
Yeah. So communication is one part, right? Transparency through communication is absolutely essential. But even in terms of shifting priorities, as these in your example of the mergers and acquisition,
right?
Not that priorities change overnight, but they start changing within a quarter or two, I would imagine, right?
Sometimes faster than that.
So
yeah.
Or maybe I'm being too generous at the time horizon. But the question then becomes, people can feel, to your point, this is a dynamic world, right? So you have to suddenly. It may feel like a student body left kind of situation where you got to just change, and everything you were working towards may no longer be relevant. And for some people, it's a hard thing to say, "Hey, I thought this was important. I was working towards this objective, and now you're saying it's no longer important. What's going on?" Right? So, I'm sure that's happened with you and your organizations. I'm just curious as to how you manage that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to one of the hallmarks of private equity is it's very dynamic. What the strategy that you might have had one week might need to shift a little next week, or it might need to be overhauled. So, this environment is extremely entrepreneurial. It's all hands on deck. You need to embrace ambiguity. You need to embrace being flexible, and you need to feel comfortable in these fluid type, squishy type of environments. And so, I think once you can get your mindset in that it's a little flexible, it's a little dynamic, teams can be a little bit more comfortable on that. But I think what I would probably offer up in that time, in that. What might seem like that it's ever changing is listen. The only way that the organization can deliver the goals for the financial goals, or even in the transition from one private equity firm to another, as we were talking about, is really understanding what employees need and what the teams need. So listen. Honor the one-on-one time, honor those town halls. It will go a long way, because even when you get into the mindset that it's very fluid, it's very dynamic, we forget about that. We're human. We want stability. We want to know that it's stable. And it really is important for employees to be able to have an opportunity to vocalize.
Yeah, well, somebody on the who's listening in and saying, "Listening is such a great skill. You're so right." So
we forget about that, though, Yogesh. And so, it's easy for us to talk about listening here, but when you're in the thick of things and you're I was in the hot seat. I mentioned I reported to the CEO, and sometimes the numbers, we're in the red, and why is the competition have this price, and I thought we were on promotion. And we've got to be nimble. We've got to be flexible, and I've got to listen to my team on the whys, so I'm able to communicate that up whenever these questions come in. So it is important, and I think probably the other thing that I'd probably layer onto that is our teams and people want to feel empowered. And so, I mentioned in the private equity world, it is very autonomous. You have a direct a link to the C-suite. You've got direct link to individuals and myself on the senior team. You can truly influence. The only way that you could truly deliver the financial metrics in a very resource allocated environment is you've got to empower your teams.
Mhm.
And the teams truly need to feel that they're able to do their jobs. No one wants to feel micromanaged. I know there's times where I might be my team members will probably say, well, Raul, you're probably too involved in my business here. And I might have been a little bit more passionate about certain areas, but ultimately you want to listen to your team. They want to be able to do their jobs, and they want to be able to feel empowered. But at the same time, you earn trust by delivering that transparency and just having that common knowledge that's shared with teams.
Yeah. So, but in that, I think there are two things that I was thinking about as you were talking about that point, right? Which is uh, maintaining motivation is really important, because listening helps you then help motivate them, because they know that if they trust you and they know that you're taking their feedback into account, right? That helps motivate the team. But the
Right.
other thing also, the downside also, I think that you probably were paying attention to, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so please tell me if I'm right or wrong,
Okay.
is you're probably watching out for burnout as well, because in this such a high-paced, fast-paced environment, there is that risk, right?
There is, and I'm going to say this in a lovingly way. My 3.5 years that I worked, it might have been closer to 4.
Yeah.
I lost track of time, but the 3 years almost felt like 9 years. And I say that in a lovingly way. There's nothing negative about it. It was so dynamic, so fast paced. I mentioned having to deliver a strategy in 30 days.
Yeah.
Having to deliver a roadmap in quantum leap time. What might have felt like quantum leap time.
Mhm.
It's exciting, but it truly feels like time is moving so much faster.
Mhm.
So no, you're not putting words in my mouth. It definitely feels that way, and it can be a lot of fun. So
Yeah. So just on an aside, like, were you helping teams, and individuals in particular, you were making sure that they weren't getting burnt out or anything? Did you have any of those experiences at all, or I'm just curious?
So teams are wearing a number of different hats.
Mhm.
Burnout is something to consider.
So what are your tips, actually? Let me ask you in a way that makes it more helpful. Like, what were the tips you'd give people, either as leaders or even as individuals, as to these are the three things that you need to make sure in this dynamic environment.
Right.
These are the three things you should keep take into account, so that you don't face burnout yourself, basically. Let's say.
So great question. So first and foremost, meetings. So owning your calendar. So I think I believe one of the things that helped our organization and the teams that were under my leadership is all these meetings, because I kept hearing over and over again, well, Raul, I'm in so many meetings. I've got this meeting, that meeting. We did a workshop with the senior leaders in the organization that were managing teams. They got together and they took a look at, okay, what are all these meetings? Is there overlap? How can we be more structured so that we can have less meetings and be more productive? So, and essentially that also results in less burnout. So there's time to actually do your job versus being in the meetings all day long. So the first critical part that we did to help to aid in burnout is what are all these meetings? Who's driving the meetings? Are there agendas? Can we be more efficient? So really working with each of the cross-functional leaders together in a room to understand what are these critical meetings, and can we shape this a little differently so that we can have more meeting, more time carved out throughout the week, where perhaps it's Tuesday and Wednesday, we have these critical meetings versus peppered throughout the week. So that was one way. The second that I consistently would work with my team is schedule downtime. Schedule, in my own calendar, I've got, I carve out time that's called deep focus, where it's just time for myself so I can have some heads down thinking. And so that is that is what I would recommend with my team as well. So, and the teams were already literally using that type of mentality. And then third, as a senior leadership team, we would engage in some fun activity. We would celebrate wins, or go out for team lunches, or do volunteer work. So it really all is about having purpose and rewarding our progress that we're doing. So it's just really ensuring that we're carving out that time together and celebrating as a team. So that's what I would offer up, Yogesh, is really about, I hear about meeting overload. What are those critical meetings? Can you reduce some of them, be more productive in them? So that'd be one. Have scheduled deep or downtime for yourself, be consistent with it. And then third, celebrate the wins, celebrate your team, have those outings to just have those fun moments, because at the end of the day, we're human and we want to celebrate together.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think this is fantastic, right? And I think, for everyone, it doesn't matter which kind of company you work in, what you just said, Raul, is so spot on, right? Because we all live in a fast-paced environment right now. There's so much coming at us, right? So, being able to own your calendar and manage your time, and giving yourself time to think, right, and disengage, and to celebrate your wins, as you said, these are all relevant tools. So thank you. I know this wasn't a question that I was intending to ask you, but
it's all good. And I remembered, meeting overload is it's a reality.
It's a thing, right?
I get it.
So coming back, one of the big topic areas, and I know, you've been playing around with this, that I'm also playing, and this is the whole AI conversation. And in a way, it feels like,
by the way,
AI is such a big thing for this topic, right? So tell me, let's start first with, in a resource constrained environment, how can AI tools help?
Love the question. I love that AI, it may sound like a buzzword today. Yogesh, you and I have talked a lot about AI. What are these tools? What's going on? So when, I'll give a really good example of a tool that's available for everyone to use. It's free, ChatGPT. So whether you love it, you don't love it, I have learned to embrace it. And I think teams today are starting to learn how to understand that, especially in a limited resource environment where I wish we had more team members or more people. If let's take ChatGPT as an example. If you saw that as a additional helping hand, or think of it as a team of people, or it could be your agency partner, this is a quote free direct report that is working for you and is able to deliver results back to you in minutes. I think what I've learned in just using ChatGPT, in this particular example, is I started learning how to navigate certain prompts. So I could have, it's only as good as a direction that you. So let's break it down. An individual needs clear communication on what the task is at work. You almost need to treat the same way in the generative AI space of what exactly you're looking for. So if you can be more specific and more precise on what you're looking for, then that can deliver some best results. I'll give an example. So let's ChatGPT. Let's pretend you and I are launching a brand new laptop, and we're like, okay, well. We need teams of people, it's just you and I, who are the insights folks? What's the competition out there, et cetera? Well, ChatGPT, we could ask it, hey, I'm looking to target 20 to 30-year-olds, male and females. I'm launching a laptop. I want to understand the competitive dynamics in today's laptop. What are the benchmarks that are needed in laptops, and what are some of the features and benefits that consumers are looking for today in that demographic? Imagine putting in that prompt into ChatGPT, and layering in, according to professionals or according to the experts, it's kind of adding that prompt in there. You would be surprised at what it would deliver back to you.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Look, I just came out of finishing a three-part webinar series this past Tuesday,
Hmm.
where I'm talking about using tools like ChatGPT to do exactly what you just described, right? And now, actually, one of the things, and I think I've shown them to you, but for the audience, just to give them a sense, you can also have access to what's called custom GPT tools on ChatGPT now, also, right?
Which I love it.
So,
I have that. I have the paid feature, by the way, and
yeah,
I'm playing around with it. I've been developing these concepts of experientials. It's been fantastic. So yeah, back to you.
yeah, no. So I've built about 12 or 13 of these custom GPT tools to do the kinds of things that you're talking about from the call it the client side, right? Setting up how do I understand my audience? How do I create my segmentation? How do I create brand claims? What should my brand positioning be, right? Things that we do as work inside an organization, doesn't matter what kind of organization. These tools that I've built can do exactly that for you because I've given it the structure, the framework. So all you got to put in is your prompt for the category, the brand, the product, whatever it is,
Right.
and the framework will take over and it'll give you the output in a way that you would actually say, hey, you've actually helped me advance this 10 times faster than had I done this offline, basically. you
Right.
know
And that's the beauty of these tools and whether it's you're a private equity backed or in publicly traded organizations,
yeah.
embracing these tools now or early on, it's almost as though we need to see them as an extension of our team. It
Yes.
could be an extension of one person or a team of people or an insights department. It,
Hmm.
it may not necessarily be replacing, it's additive. And
Yeah.
so it is truly more resources available to you that can deliver output sometimes in seconds or minutes. And so
Yeah.
it allows you to be more strategic
Hmm.
in your shaping of the strategy or the execution, or be more nimble in whatever it is, the work that you're doing and
Can
delivering.
I ask you? So this is a conversation I've heard from other people, and I've not had a good answer, to be honest with you, because there are pros and cons on both sides, right?
Right.
On one side, I feel like what you just described, like this helps in a big way. Feels to me that anybody, not anybody, sorry, everybody should have that skill set
Mm.
on how to write the prompts so that or use these tools so that they can do their jobs more effectively. That's one side of the argument, right?
Right.
The other side of the argument is to say, no, no, we need to have specialized people in the organization that are prompt engineers who
Mm.
do this for you, right? I'm curious to hear where are you on that spectrum? Where do you think we should go?
Yeah. Great question, because this is still the wild west, of AI. I think it's critical for us as users because we don't know how AI is going to shape or transform our organizations and the way
Yeah.
that we work. I'm from the mindset that we as an individual need to understand the prompt and how to ask a proper question.
Mhm.
Because today, if I were to look back in my in my own professional career and working with our teams, for example, when we're writing a brief to an agency, the
Mhm.
brief is only as good as the inputs that you deliver. What's
Yes.
the problem? What are we trying to solve? What's that one unique selling proposition that we're trying to deliver?
Mhm.
Et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to communicate that into the generative AI as a prompt will be
Mhm.
critical, not only as a marketer but as a business leader, to deliver the appropriate work we want from the AI partner that we're using.
Yeah.
So quite honestly, Yogesh, I'm probably right now where I am is in the individual becoming more experienced. I wouldn't say you can be the expert, but it's more about becoming more experienced and comfortable in
Mhm.
understanding that the value of the prompts and how you ask the questions and the
Mhm.
follow-ups and the
Mhm.
refinement is what will deliver the best output from the AI and the tool.
Right.
Depending on which programs you use, they can be iterative. It can learn against itself, and
Mhm.
it could truly be some of the most powerful member of your team
Mhm.
if you embrace it from that perspective.
I love what you're saying. So actually, another piece that you hinted on, and I want to just get your full view on that. it's not just about knowing how to write the prompts. You use the example. It's funny you use the example of creative brief, because literally yesterday I was in a conversation with somebody who said gave exactly the same example, where he said that writing a creative brief is an example of a prompt. In this case, you're directing it towards an agency.
Right.
In this case, you're doing it with ChatGPT or whatever, but the intent is still the same, right?
Exactly.
So, but there's the second part to it, which is when you get the output, how to assess the quality of the output.
Yeah,
That's a skill set as well, right?
great question, because I think both, and I know you've played in ChatGPT, and I know we're just using that as a particular example.
Yeah.
That is a great example where you got to check your work.
Yeah.
You got to what's going. There's still, and again, it's still the Wild West. In these types of platforms, but there are structured platforms in today's marketing world where they offer more gated consumer touch points, where there is more specificity and structured data points that allow that you don't have to second guess, but that these are actual factual evidence-based facts that's coming from that particular AI. Now, these tools probably aren't free. They're subscription. Whether they're subscription or one-time modules or et cetera. There's a number of organizations that I've been exploring, talking to today, that are very, very powerful, and I can see how you can couple it with the free service like ChatGPT, where you might have to, check some of the work and make sure that you check in with some of your data inputs, but then you can layer it with some of these platforms that are paid platforms that do have more of the gating, from that perspective, that ensures it's evidence-based facts, and you feel comfortable with the quantitative or the qualitative data that's coming through.
So follow-up question to that, right? So the one question I've always had is that, what's the likely scenario for a company, right? Whether it's private equity or public, you would be sitting in another role, in the not too distant future,
Right.
where you have to make a decision on this, right? As to, do you build or do you buy, right? Or do you rent in this case, right? Or subscribe, let's say. Obviously privacy, confidentiality, all those things obviously play a role in the decision making.
For sure.
I think we all get that. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there is a market for vendors to offer specialized services that can be subscribed to or purchased by companies? Or do you see a scenario where most companies are going to go down the path of, no, we're going to build it in our own world, in our own ecosystem. Thank you very much, but stay away, kind of thing,
I'm seeing both, Yogesh, to be honest. So
Okay.
there's a number of solution providers out there that are offering the solutions. We can talk a little bit more about them in a second, but like Yogi's one, Clue, QLO is another one that's out there. Some organizations have AIs that they're going to invest in. So I understand, Amazon has got an AI tool that's built in, for example, that's some investment within the organizations that I'm familiar with. So, I think we're seeing, because it's a Wild West still, we're seeing a little bit of both happening, out there. And, what I would offer as counsel or guidance to teams out there, especially if you don't have AI, you haven't been using it, going back to that mentality of test and learn, be open to testing and learning, these AI tools. And the vendors or the partners that want to offer these services understand that companies are a little hesitant of investing in these tools because they're not familiar with them. And they may not want to spend the money, even though it might be less dollars than other services out there. It's still an investment. And so the ability to offer demos or 1 month, I'm making this on the fly right now. A 1 month trial or a 90-day trial. I think that'll offer the test and learn mentality, so that an organization can test a particular platform, a particular AI tool, see how it works within their systems. There's probably some investment that needs to be involved, but then see how it's able to deliver some of the results, make work more efficient, And then if it makes sense, then the organization together with the vendor partner can then scale it appropriately. And that could be a more successful partnership that can be enduring and have a sustainable, or have longevity in that approach.
It makes a lot of sense, right? And I love what you're saying, because ultimately it's a case of, you want to see what's out there, you want to play with it, right? And if there's things that you like, I say engage with those kinds of companies and say,
Right.
or even like, individuals, right, who may be designing things on their own,
Right.
and see what kind of relationship you can build with them, so that way, it's a win-win for everyone at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
And I see this as being a competitive advantage for companies at the end of the day.
And individuals too. So if
Yeah.
you're looking to advance your own career, I
Yeah.
think you don't know AI and the company's not. I would encourage marketers, different disciplines, leverage and use and explore these AI tools. Now is the time to truly get ahead of it before it's here and you're like, oh, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So you can get ahead of it, understand it, feel comfortable in it,
Mhm.
and embrace some of these test and learns and bring them into your own organizations. It could be something that helps your own individual career as well.
I have an example for you, and I don't remember if I told you this one or not, but a student who graduated last year, who I knew, she wasn't one of my students, but she was from South Carolina. She
Okay.
reached out to me in February with all the custom GPT tools I've built, and she was, she got, she learned from me, how to use them.
Right.
These are some of my tools are available online for free right now. To your example of,
Right.
experiment a bit kind of thing.
Right.
She took it to her manager, convinced her manager to get the paid version of ChatGPT in the company she was at. They played around with it. They liked what they saw. They used it on some project. I don't know what the projects were, obviously for
Right.
confidentiality reasons. And she told me that it was a big hit, right? And it just
I'm
so
not,
happened that she started talking about it, to
right.
other companies about what she was doing, and one company offered her a job, so she chose to leave. The
Right.
company where she was at, when they heard she was leaving, they basically offered her a 50% increase in her salary.
Wow.
Right? This is a 23-year-old, right? And I was like just blown away with that
Right.
example, because to your point, this is the time. This is the time to learn and play, because you may make yourself a lot more valuable to organizations because you know something more than they do at this
And
point.
you're learning more. You're learning a new
Yeah.
skill, as well. So I love that example. That is, that individual, that student that you mentioned, is someone really taking ownership of their career,
Exactly.
really, and having the courage to bring it into an organization,
Mhm.
and sell it in, which can feel a little scary. But obviously, in this example, and I'm not surprised that the metrics or that the results her team was surprised. But that's a great example of embracing something as a test and learn, and being open to teams being able to deliver and bring those to the organization.
Exactly. Well, listen, we're coming almost to the top of the hour. So I have one last question for you, my friend. You know, given everything we talked about, we started with the conversation about private equity. We talked about, transformation. We talked about, managing change, managing yourself, and tips around, how to make sure you don't face burnout, which was not in our planned conversation.
Right.
We talked about the role of AI, and how it can be an expansion and a value add to your tool, to your team, if you want to call it that, right? And we're ending now basically with this last question, which is, looking forward, if you were to offer people two or three pieces of advice, one, two, three, what would they be?
Great. First advice: private equity. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. If you're looking for a very dynamic, fast-paced environment, try it out. I think I believe it would be very fruitful in your career. So that's number one. Second, stay involved with marketing and external organizations. That has been the hallmark of what I've been doing these last few years, is stay involved with marketing organizations like Brand Innovators, the Garage Group, Ad Age. Stay involved with your marketing peers and what's going on in the marketplace. And then the third thing, we just talked about it, understand AI. Definitely get ahead of it. Now is the time to truly understand those tools, play around with it. Don't be afraid with it. And as you mentioned, bring them into your organizations.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Rahul, this has been phenomenal. This has been such a high energy conversation. You gave so much information in such a short period of time. I know I learned a lot. I'm quite certain that the audience has also learned a lot, whether they were watching live or whether you watch it subsequently. This is one of those master classes on marketing and business management and
Wow.
strategic leadership. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
doing this. And being here with me. I can't thank you enough, my friend. So
It's
really
been a
appreciate
pleasure. Thank you for having me, Yogesh. This was a great experience for myself. I hope everyone learned something as well. Reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, Yogesh, you've got some snippets that you'll probably share out, but
it.
I'm available as a resource for anyone out there that wants to have a follow up conversation with me.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. So thank you for offering that. For the folks listening in, feel free to connect with Raul. Feel free to connect with me or follow me on my personal page. I have a couple of other business pages as well. One is called Y2S Consulting, where I post all my newsletter that comes out every Monday. It's called In Search of Normal, where I talk about AI and marketing. I talk about different tools and different things that are going on in the space of marketing. One of them right now I'm talking a lot about is synthetic data, which is a topic for another day. We can talk about that too. And the final page is called Next Frontier and Insights. That's the page where you'll find this podcast and every other podcast that I've done since August of last year. So I hope you enjoyed this show. The next one's going to be on July 11th at the same time with Tanya Pinto. She's the founder of a charity called Baldan, and this is one I encourage everybody to watch, because this is a woman who's doing this by herself. She's had a massive impact, not just only in India, where she started this charity. By the way, it's very personal to her, so that's what makes this story really, and this interview so engaging. But she's also done work in Ukraine. She's done work in Africa. So she's done work in a lot of different places. So I'm actually hosting her to give her a platform so that she can talk about her charity. And I hope you actually use that as an opportunity to support her cause, because it's helping children at the end of the day. So thank you again for everyone joining, and see you on July 11th.
Thank you.